Last time we finished designing our inventory slot widget, so that now we can work on our actual inventory widget that contains all of our individual slots. First off, let's close the inventory slot and create a new widget blueprint. Call that one inventory. Open it up, make it full screen, and again change the setting here to desired on screen. Then search for a vertical box and put that inside of our canvas panel. And for the vertical box, make sure that it's sized to content. Now grab a border and drag that in here. And on top of the border, drag a horizontal box. For that horizontal box, make sure that there is no padding, and go to the border and change the brush color to a very dark color. Just use black and put down the alpha to something like 0.5 or 0.6. Both will work. Now for our horizontal box, we will add a text first. And that text will just say inventory. Make sure that it's aligned to the left of our border and change the font size to 22. Then we also need the close button for our inventory, and to do that without drawing an image for it, you can grab a button, drag it on our horizontal box, and on top of the button drag another text. For the text content, just press an X, make it size 22 again, and for the padding you will have no padding to the top and no to the bottom, but like 10 to the left, 10 to the right, so it looks like a perfect square. Then what you can do is go to the button and change the style for our hovered state. Just use a dark red tint and copy that one, paste it for our hovered and for our press. And for the hovered, make it a little bit lighter, something orange. Close that one, and for the press, also make it a little bit lighter, but a bit darker than the hovered state. Right, press OK for that. And you want to make sure that our button is set to fill and to align to the right, because the width of our inventory widget will be defined by the slots that we will add in here later on, and so our button will always be set to appear at the right of our border here. You can also expand the padding and give it some padding to the left, so there is a bit of space between our inventory text and the actual button. Something like 10 should work. Alright, now you can go to the button again and give it a name. Sorry, I forgot that. So call that close button, and it should be a variable. And you can also go to the text and make its color and opacity to an alpha of something like 0.6. So that's it for the top part of our inventory. Now we'll need a size box. Drag that on top of our vertical box, not on top of the border. And for that size box, you want to use a height override of 250 pixel. If you want to use a larger inventory, feel free to change the height override to something higher, but I think that 250 pixel works just fine for me. On top of that size box, we will add another border. Give it no padding. And let's get the brush color again make it black and lower the alpha to something like 0.4, just so there is a bit of shadow. And on top of our border, we will now add a scroll box, so there is enough space for an infinite number of widgets with a scroll box here. And then we'll also need a container for all of our slot widgets, which will be a uniform grid panel. Also go to the size box and don't make it stretch horizontally, because our width should be defined by the number of slots that are in a row. Make that horizontally aligned center, and you will see that it becomes much smaller now. Then for our uniform grid panel, you want to give it a slot padding of 5. So there is 5 pixel space between one slot to another. And you can see how it will look like by just going to user created and search for our inventory slot created in the last video. Drag that on top of a uniform grid panel and drag some more on there, like 4. Now go to the second one and change the column to 1, and you see that it appears at the side of our first here. Go to the next one, make the column to 2, and to the next one, make the column to 3. So you get an idea how our inventory will look like later on. Also, I noticed that maybe our border here should be a little bit less opaque. Make that 0.3 maybe. Yeah, that should work. And now let's delete our inventory slots, because we will populate them with a function that we'll create. Delete them. And compile and save. Let's hop over to the event graph and create a function called generate slot widgets. Before we do anything in here, we will also need some variables, because our inventory obviously needs to know about the inventory actor, which is VP underscore inventory reference. Can make that editable and expose and spawn, and it will need to know about the slots per row. So you can define that, make it an integer, also expose and spawn and editable, compile and save. We'll give it a default value of 5. So now we can start working instead of a function, but we forgot one variable. Go to the designer and our uniform grid panel, call that our slot panel, and make it a variable so we can access it now. First thing we'll need to do is to grab our slot panel and clear it. So we remove all children that are already there, because we want to populate it new. Then grab our inventory and off of it search for our slots, so our array with every slot of it, and call it for each loop, because we want to create a slot widget for all of our slots. So for the loop body, you want to create a widget, and the class will be our inventory slot. Its slot index we will get directly from the array index, and the inventory reference will be our own inventory reference. Create that one. And the return value, we want to grab our slots panel, of it search for add to the add child to uniform grid function. The content will be our return value, so we add our slot to our panel, and then we want to change our column and row values that we saw before. So of the uniform grid slot reference, you can type in set row and set column, connect these two, and we will have to find a way to figure them out just with our slots per row variables. So we have to do some math. For our row, you'll get the array index, make it to a float, and divide it by our slots per row variable, converted to a float. The value of that we'll also have to make to an integer again, so search for truncate. If you don't know what truncate does, for example, if you have 1.7, it will be truncated to 1, or if you have 2.2, it will also be truncated towards 2, and take the return value and plug it in our row. So if we want to have 3 slots per row, we will get our array indexes from 0, 1, and 2, divide them by 3, and the value will be between 0 and 1, truncated towards 0, and that will be a row for the first 3. And then we'll have our index 3, which is actually our 4th slot, because arrays start with a 0, and that will be divided by our slots per row, which is 3, and it will be 1, so it will appear in the next row. For the column, make the array index to a float again, and this time we will use a function called division whole and remainder, and the divisor will be our slots per row converted to a float again. So division whole and remainder divides our dividend, the array index, by our divisor, and it returns a whole value, which is the return value here, and the rest of it. For example, if you divide 3.5 by 3, you will have the return value of 1 and the remainder of 0.5. So take our remainder, truncate that one again, and plug that in for our column. And there is one thing we'll have to do as well, because we will need to store all of our slot widgets in an array, so we can access them later. So just the return value here, promote that to a variable, call that inventory slots, or call that slots widget. Disconnect it here, because otherwise there will be an error message. Now we can make that one an array, drag it in here and say add, drag all of those to the right a bit, and add our return value, connect the execution wires. Now go back to the beginning of our function, because when we clear our slots panel, we also want to take our slots widget and clear them as well. Alright, that's it for our generate slot widgets function. You can compile and save that one. Now we'll need another widget, which is our main widget. In that we will put our inventory widget, and only our main widget will be created. So call that one main widget, open it up, and inside here, just under user created, search for your inventory, drag it in here, anchor that to the bottom right or whatever fits you best, and move it over a bit. Also, it should be size to content, so when we fill our inventory with slots, it can expand in width. Now another thing we'll have to do is to give it a descriptive name, call that inventory widget. Compile and save. Now go to the graph and create some variables again, because we'll have to know about our inventory again. Make that a bp underscore inventory, a reference, editable and exposed on spawn, and we need to know about our slots per row, integer, a variable that is also editable and exposed on spawn. And now when our event construct happens, so when we create this widget, we want to grab our inventory widget, set the inventory variable there to the inventory reference we have. Do the same thing for our slots per row variable in here, so set slots per row to our slots per row variable. Just pass over some variables from the main widget to our inventory widget, and after we set all these variables we can get our inventory widget and call our generate slots widgets function. Now the problem is that we didn't create our main widget yet, so close it and we'll go to the blueprints folder and do it in our BP inventory. On event begin play, after we resize our array, we will create a widget of the class main widget. The inventory reference will be our cells, and the slots per row you can promote here to a variable. Call that one slots per row. Make it editable, expose on spawn, compile and save, and give it a default value of something like 4. Now we'll take the return value and promote that to a variable, call that main widget, so we can access it later. And of our main widget, get the inventory widget, not set it, but get the inventory widget and promote that one to a variable as well. Call it inventory widget. After we promoted these variables, we can now grab our inventory widget, grab our main widget and add that to the screen. Compile and save, and it should be working right now. Before we can actually playtest it, go to your top-down BP under blueprints, open the top-down character, and remember that in here we spawned our BP inventory actor, so here we'll have to define how many slots per row there are. So we have 20 slots in total, and so we can say that it should be 4 slots per row. That way there will be 5 rows with 4 slots on each of them. Compile and save. Now we should be able to test. And there is our inventory. You can see that there are no items assigned to it and that we can hover over them even though there is nothing on it. So to change that, exit from here. On our widgets, in our inventory widget, in our function, generate slot widgets, at the very end we want to grab our return value from the slot widget creation here and update this slot. So now when we hit play, you can see all of our slots and we can't access them because there's nothing on it. However, there is another issue, because when we step over an item, pick it up, you won't see anything. And that is because in our inventory we never actually update our slots. So let's change that now. Go to your blueprints, BP inventory, and let's go to the event graph and make an event here. Add a custom event, call that one update slot at index. Give it an input of an index. And for that one you can grab our inventory widget. From there get our slots. Off of the array, get from it at the index we receive from our function, and just call update slot. Compile and save. Now let's go into our add item function, and every time we set an array element, it means that we basically change a slot. We want to call that function for the index we change here. Alright, so let's just go to if we fail and if we find an empty slot. Then after we set the array element, we want to update slot at index, and the index will be our found index. Here we're just calling our function again, that should be fine. So if our item can be stacked and we don't find a free stack, but we find an empty stack, we will make some space here, call that function again, update slot at index. Index will be our found index again. And down here, when our local amount is greater than our maximum stack size, do the same thing again, update slot at index. When our local amount is not greater, when it's less or equal to our maximum stack size, update the slot at index. Its index will be our found index. Again, go to the top path here. Here, when we set the array element, call that function again. Make it the found index. And do that once more for our set array element here. Call update slot at index and choose the found index. Connect all of this, and now we should be able to test properly. So we can see that all of our slots are empty right now. We have 4 slots per row and a total amount of 20 slots. If we hover over our close button, change the style, and let's go over the item. And we can see that we have 50 health potion here. So when you hover over them, you see that orange little border. Let's pick up the next, and we see that there was created another stack with one of it, and I think that here are 2 maps. If we pick them up, you can see them, and because they're not stackable, we don't have this little count here. Alright, that's it for this episode. In the next one we will probably add some drag and drop functionality for our inventory here. See you then.